When you do stuff like that and you don't tell the truth, it's just an open door for people to come at you. Once again, Vince McMahon 1000% did all that shit. I'm John Renton with my review, Mr. McMahon, Episode 2, Heat. After Episode 1 ended with the success of WrestleMania and they were off to the goddamn races and nothing could stop them until scandals were looming over and pushing down upon them. None of which Vince had a hand in at all. Some of those are revisited before WrestleMania 1 occurred. And me, oh my, down on the Stamford Bayou, there's so much to unpack here. Let me know your thoughts on this series so far in the comments, please. Individual reviews were needed because, yes, hardcore wrestling fans knew a lot of this shit already. A few neat little tidbits of information, and Tony Atlas telling one particular thing that was pretty damning and further proof that somebody that was claimed to be innocent never ever fucking was. But yeah, let's just get into it here. So, we go to Stand Back. That's a fact gonna make them all drop. I can't dance or sing, but stand back. Man, the Slammy Awards, how much cocaine was on that particular set? Nevertheless, the news reports about, second-rate arenas no longer being the norm for professional wrestling. It's about glitz and glamour and the big lighting and all that. Mid-South Wrestling, World Class Championship Wrestling, the AWA, Florida Championship Wrestling to an extent, the Crockett's. So many, particular territories were drawing well. Memphis was drawing pretty well. They were drawing regularly with a regular touring schedule. It's just that Vince was able to market better. That was a big theme of the, early part of this and even about midway through. He could market better. Saturday night's main event, that was a big deal to be on network television. Dick Ebersol was a big proponent of that. And Bruce, once again, is an idiot. It's kind of funny that Bruce Pritchard talks about, being there is a big goddamn deal. Was he in the company in 1985, 86? I thought he was there sometime in 87. I mean, I'm genuinely trying to remember. But I do recall that he was gone for a certain point, like in the early 90s. He brought in The Undertaker and then was gone soon after. But nevertheless, jolly old Bruce. So, nevertheless, the touring schedule was absolutely brutal. There were no days off. Apparently, Fred Rosser took that and decided to make his own gimmick. I kid, of course. He seems to be doing well for himself. And, yeah, nowadays, it's better. There's the guaranteed money, a lighter touring schedule. And they don't have as much of a, reason to work hurt and everything. Even though you could lose your spot technically, there's more chances for you to keep that because of guaranteed contracts. Ventura tried to get a union going before Mania 2. If we all, basically said we're going to unionize or walk out, it'll be fine. Hogan double-crossed or stooged on him because Hogan realized it was going to affect his money. Jesse Ventura, by this point, was not a standard commentator. He was just, a straight commentator, not wrestling anymore. He had the blood clots in his lungs. Whatever it was, bottom line is he worked out better as a commentator. If you've ever seen Jesse work, even in, his earlier career in the AWA, he was never all that good. But he was a great commentator. So, Hogan stooged on him. Vince basically just dismissed everything that Jesse said, that no one in the locker room would get behind Jesse. Yes, it's hard to get people to fully unionize in something like this when everything in wrestling is about, yes, you're on a team, but you're also out for yourself because you want the top spots. You want to be able to earn the big money. I think more people would have probably gotten behind Jesse had Hogan not stooged off on the whole thing. But Tony Atlas basically says we would lose our jobs if we went along with this, so we didn't do it. If I recall, Tony Atlas was in Texas and other areas in the later 80s and then came back as Saba Simba. Saved his life, apparently, because apparently he was not doing that well financially, and thankfully he seems to be doing okay now. So, yeah, Jesse Ventura had every right to be upset at Vince. I don't particularly blame him for holding a grudge and only coming back recently with the new administration. Mania 2, they had a show in New York, Chicago, and then LA. He got the idea from seeing Starrcade do a simulcast at the Omni and the Greensboro Memorial Coliseum for Starrcade 85. I want to say they did it for 84 also, but I'm trying to remember some of this. The whole point is they were doing those simulcasts. But Vince said, I can do it better. He didn't do it better, though. there were like maybe 2 matches that you could really appreciate from Mania 2. The Battle Royal, for the simple fact that it was just a spectacle to see NFL players and wrestlers face off, and the only WrestleMania appearance in the ring for Bruno Sammartino. He would retire just before Mania 3, and then also the tag title match between the Dream Team, Greg Valentine and Brutus the Barber Beefcake, without his wife Betty the Barback Queefcake, and they took on the British Bulldogs, Davey Boy Smith and Dynamite Kid, who took the plunge, fucked up his back, and oh no, that piece of shit abuser suffered a horrible back injury and died alone. Good. Yeah, I'm going to be kind of mean here, and I don't really fucking care because, yeah, Vince is a piece of shit. Meltzer, by the way, gets some shots in here as well. Meltzer, who basically questioned Roman Reigns' leukemia and talked about Shibata's brain being taken out and put back in, and all the pain he does of AEW and all the running around that he does. He knows his facts and figures. He just had a brain that basically melted. So, Mania 2, yeah, it succeeded to an extent as far as business. The closed circuit places had some issues. There was like a blackout in like one area. It was Pittsburgh, or there in the environs of Philly or Pittsburgh. And they refunded that. But it was still a success. But then we skip over 86. We skip over the fact Orndorff and Hogan was a hot program that turned, the team ended. And we had Hogan and Orndorff at the big event in Toronto at, I forget the name of the stadium, but it was a big goddamn show. Big fucking deal. And that gave Vince the idea to try WrestleMania 3 at the Pontiac Silverdome. Good to be back here at the Silverdome, as Hogan said when he was at Mania 30. And he realized, also probably listening to some agents, that, Toronto was a hotbed for professional wrestling. Toronto was always hot. Even in the 90s, even when they were having issues drawing domestically here in the U.S., they were still drawing pretty well. There were Sky Dome house shows, for God's sake. Look at the capacity of the Sky Dome. WrestleMania 6, WrestleMania 18, they were running fucking house shows. They ran a Raw there, I think, that drew like 40-something thousand people. They were drawing big fucking crowds. Now, granted, that was in the later 90s, but the build to WrestleMania 3. Basically, he realizes, hey, Toronto, Detroit, Shamil, Shamazel, we can get these people to come over. So to build to WrestleMania 3, he needed Andre back there. Andre had a really bad back. His health was fading. They showed a little bit of him on the Princess Bride set. Apparently, he was a delight. And man, still wish Andre was... I mean, granted, I don't know if Andre would still be around now, even if he had the surgery and was able to address his stuff medically. Because let's be perfectly honest, the man was 46 in bad health. He would be 76 now. No, 77. So, nevertheless, Andre got coaxed back, basically. And he said, I want you to, get the surgery refused and then come back and draw the biggest house. I'm in 93,000. Okay, boss. And Vince said Andre had never been a heel. His Japan run apparently doesn't exist. At least David Shoemaker didn't say, oh, Andre used to tour as a heel. I'm not saying he didn't work heel in some places. But David Shoemaker, by the way, is a fucking idiot. So, Andre ripped the cross off of Hogan's chest and talked about this stuff. You're bleeding. Great observation there, Roddy. Rest in peace, Roddy Piper. And we go right to WrestleMania 3. Nothing about Steamboat and Savage. I know it's the Vince story, but we could have done a little bit of this because some of this padding was a little bit ridiculous. But it's the Queen of Soul, Aquifa Franklin. I'm not apologizing. She was great, but I had to make a joke there. It wasn't 93,000. Meltzer said it was around 78,000 on the high end, and I believe that. I just wish that I believed more of the shit that came out of Meltzer's mouth, but it's impossible to. I'm not saying that they didn't draw a sizable crowd. I just don't believe the 93,173 people. I just fucking don't believe it. You can't count every individual person. One, it's not high def. Two, you would go absolutely batshit insane trying to do it. But there we go. Savage and Steamboat was the best match on the show. But yes, the house was drawn primarily by Andre and Hogan. Andre was limited. Andre didn't know what he would want to do. And Hogan plays up this whole thing. Andre was always gonna do the right thing and put over Hogan. This stuff from Hogan is unfucking believable. Vince is even like, oh, he'll do the right thing or whatever, but I don't know. Yeah, you fucking did know. Andre was about business. He would let people slam him. He had been slammed a bunch of times before that. He got slammed. He'd been slammed by Hogan before. Talked about that in episode 1. And it was a success. Don't get me wrong. The Pontiac Silverdome was full. That pay-per-view did well. Closed circuit, whatever. It did well. Commercially, it was a success. Andre was gone for a number of months due to health deterioration and also to get his surgery. Had a back brace on, all that. He was basically, essentially, like, just on borrowed time by that point. Because you could tell he was limited. I'm not knocking Andre. Rest in peace, Andre. And he gave so much of the goddamn business. I wish that he was able to give even more. He wanted to give more, but his body was failing him. But Real American Plays, Hogan was the star. There's no doubt about it. But Stephanie feels that Hogan got all the credit and her dad didn't get the credit that he deserved. Hey, remember when Stephanie McMahon compared the deaths of 3,000 plus people in the tower attacks and the 9/11 attacks to what her family went through at the steroid trial? Remember that? Remember that freaking twat saying that goddamn stuff? Yeah, fuck her. Fuck Stephanie. She's just as bad as her goddamn dad. Bet some shit's gonna come out about her. Possibly. Covering my ass here. But Vince and Hogan were like one person. Tony Atlas talked about that, and that Hogan was basically, everything that Hogan said came from Vince. Everything Vince did turned to gold, Hogan said. The Hulkamania workout set. I do remember that. Now, I got into wrestling just at War to Sell the Score in 1985. I was just past 4 years old. I was watching it at a friend's house. They had cable. We didn't at the time. I was being babysat, and I do remember watching that. And the company was succeeding. The company was rolling. They were doing great business. They were drawing huge amounts of money in revenue, in merchandise. They were doing incredible business. But the touring was getting out of control. And then they skip over WrestleMania 4. They skip over WrestleMania 5. They talk about No Holds Barred. And Dookie. Yeah, it was Dookie. I may retro review that at some point, but dear God. The movie was absolute dog shit. But Vince and Hogan decided to write a script. Nah, they wrote an outline. Actually, you know what? It might explain why the movie was so goddamn bad if they just attached names there, but really were the ones that wrote it. When was Hulkamania starting to fade? Probably around definitely 1990, because they got the Ultimate Warrior, who didn't love the business. They weren't wrong. By the way, fuck the Ultimate Warrior. I'm glad he's dead. That piece of shit knocks Bobby Heenan's cancer. Knocks Davey Boy Smith, who was better in the ring than he ever was, and knocked the injustices of Martin Luther King and all the shit that he did, and all the stuff. And he talks about not Martin Luther King not being a virtuous individual, as if Ultimate Warrior had any clue about being virtuous. I hope he suffered mightily in his last few days. It would have been a shame if he just dropped right there on the last Raw. Sure, he drew. I don't have a fucking problem saying that. Read up on a lot of the shit that he said. Yet he wants to claim that he was so much better than Vince. So anyway. Yeah, Hogan goes away for a little bit. Comes back to feud with Earthquake. And then they talk about the Slaughter turn. They never mentioned why Sergeant Slaughter was gone from the company in early 85 and didn't come back for almost 6 years. About 5.5. They didn't mention that. It's because he got the Living G.I. Joe deal with Hasbro, but Vince had to deal with LJN, and Slaughter smartly went with that. One, yeah, he wasn't on a huge stage, but he was part of the AWA and was their figurehead and also made some pretty good money and also was able to have a lighter schedule and preserve his body. Honestly, if he had even if he had been able to do the Living G.I. Joe thing, I don't know if Slaughter would have meant all that much in the company by 86. And it's not knocking him. It's the direction that Vince was going. But the Desert Storm conflict got brought up. Now, they turned Slaughter heel. Oh, he's turning his back on his country. And then suddenly, Iraq, Iran, that whole conflict. Read up on it, kids. I'm not going to go into it. The idea that Vince McMahon, didn't mean to use a real world event to draw. He did. Yeah, he fucking did. He's not the only wrestling promoter to do that. But, yeah, he did want to fucking do that. And, there were death threats which, yeah, Slaughter got, and it showed how much the fans were pissed. They were pissed at the wrong person, though. Now, Slaughter was a great heel, great face, or whatever. That biography that WWE did on him was terrific, with a lot of old footage. Except his stupid wife that wanted to keep knocking the business or whatever, but you shouldn't have married him then. But they skip right to WrestleMania 7. They don't mention the fact that the LA Memorial Coliseum ticket sales flopped so bad they had to move to the LA Sports Arena, which had a great atmosphere, don't get me wrong. But if they had like 40, 50,000 people in that 100,000 seat, stadium, it wouldn't have looked good. 16, 17,000, or whatever the LA Sports Arena held, was a better crowd, a better atmosphere. Go back and watch that crowd. Go back and watch that show. Some of that stuff to sit through. That crowd they weren't hot for everything, but they were hot for most of it. The sound echoed throughout the whole thing instead of going up. Up into the goddamn heavens. But it did have a big fight feel. Hogan beat Slaughter. The crowd was starting to get tired of Hogan. They were. Because Hogan had been there at that point for 7 years. Almost 7.5 years by that point, actually. He came in back in late 83. Costas talked about the fact that he wasn't comfortable with the conflict being exploited on television, so he withdrew his appearance from WrestleMania 7. And that's fair. I have my issues with Costas, personally. I mean, I think that sometimes he gets a little bit too far up his own ass, but Costas also is a very, very, very good sports analyst and stuff like that, and does have a lot more positives than negatives. And then the Dr. Zahorian stuff. But first, Vince McMahon said, okay, we're not going to use real-life conflicts, don't do that. And then he did the same thing with Muhammad Hassan and ruined his goddamn career. 14 years later? Good job, Vince. I mean, the Un-Americans, that kind of stuff. And, his daughter comparing the terrorist attacks to the steroid trial stuff. Oh, but don't worry, she was upset. She was just a kid. She knew what the fuck she was doing. So, Dr. Zahorian stuff. The steroid trial, Dark Side of the Ring stuff, that's been talked about. Hulk basically talked about using steroids. But then the Arsenio Hall appearance a little bit later, and he said that he's not a steroid user. He's only used it 3 times medically. Yeah, Terry. Yeah, sure, you fucking asshole. And then talk about buying steroids and pills, and Vince bought steroids from Zahorian. And then the laws got broken out. Reagan's just say no. Just say no to minorities succeeding. Just say no to actual humanity. That's what the Reagan administration brought. Look back on it. Also, Nancy Reagan was just as fucking evil as he was. The throat goat, as some people say. They're both rotting in hell, so that's good. So Vince said, we're going to have a drug policy. This is after the WBF didn't succeed. Vince McMahon did not mention, by the way, the untold amounts of money that he spent, the guaranteed contracts, the fact he was paying these bodybuilders more than most of the wrestlers, not named Hulk Hogan or Randy Savage or stuff like that, or the Ultimate Warrior, when he came back. None of the big stars were earning less than the bodybuilders, but the bodybuilders were earning a whole bunch of money more than a lot of people. And he didn't mention the fact that people didn't want to see that, the pay-per-view that they had flopped, and the whole production flopped. It was terrible. Look at some of the clips, look at some of the episodes, if you can find them on YouTube or other websites, and make sure you have a good, firewall protection. But just look at that. Look at that shit and tell me that that was going to succeed. Even if there wasn't the steroid cloud looming. So, basically, he does something where you can, the World Wrestling Federation, you can guarantee that we have drug-free entertainment the whole family can enjoy. And then the camera cuts and he looks disgusted. Because he wanted to treat his wrestlers like cattle. Now, it's not like plenty of wrestlers weren't using steroids before Vince came along. And before Vince took his expansion national. Take a look at Kerry Von Erich. Take a look at Hercules Hernandez. Take a look at various people. Yes, Vince popularized the shit, but there was steroid use before Vince McMahon got full control of the goddamn company. So, he basically told Hogan, just tell the truth, it's so much easier. Yeah, Vince, why didn't you tell the truth about all the shit you did? And speaking of telling the truth, I'm going to tell the truth about Phil Muchnick. Yes, he has a point that Vince McMahon's a dog shit person, but Phil is a fucking pile of shit himself. He is. Fucking look at the guy. He's a goddamn, he's a goddamn goof. He's a loon. Yeah, he's right about some things in wrestling, but he also has a vendetta against people and maybe probably should check himself before he wrecks himself. So, Vince was an evil, vile person. Still is. Phil's a goddamn idiot. He would get his mailbox full. You don't know the half of all the bad stuff that goes on. Atlas said that they use women and treat them like toys. Atlas at least admits that. I'm not saying that makes it right, but at least he admitted it. And then we go back to 1983 with Jimmy Snuka and Vince McMahon paying off the stuff and the fact that Jimmy never suffered one little bit for him murdering Nancy Argentina. And I feel for Jimmy Snuka's other wife. I forget her name. It was on Dark Side of the Ring. I feel for her, but I don't feel bad for Jimmy Snuka. And honest to God, the Snuka name should never be mentioned on mainstream wrestling. Tamina was, she wasn't like her dad or whatever. I mean, I don't think anybody fell down some stairs while Tamina was around. And Sim Snuka, the only crime that he committed was not being very good in the ring. I don't know why he decided to dump on them, but nevertheless, let's roll. Jimmy Snuka got, off because Vince paid off the cops. And then we go to the Ring Boy scandal. I'm not going to expand upon this, and I do want to also quickly say, I started a series a year or two ago, I don't remember, The Good, the Bad, and the Vince. And it stopped somewhere around 2001, 2002. And I had other notes. I got busy doing other shit, and I haven't picked it back up. I don't think I'm going to pick it back up, guys, because this is revealing so much more stuff. And there's no reason to really, divulge that when this series is going to expose it. And there's so much stuff coming out about Vince. All that stuff's going to be old. Some of that information is old because new stuff has come out. But I do thank people for still remembering that. Some people on Twitter messaged me and asked me when I was going to do that. I'm like, okay, thank you. So, nevertheless, Ring Boy scandal. Mel Phillips, who Brett called a pedo, preyed on young boys. I hope that Mel Phillips suffered mightily or whatever, and I hope he rotted from the inside out and suffered horribly for being what he is. Terry Garvin, same thing. Tom Cole, former Ring Boy. He had every right to come forward because of what he suffered. And I do recall that Mel actually got rehired by Linda, because she felt bad for him. But then he was fired again because he couldn't control himself, because he was an evil son of a bitch who deserved to die horribly. Vince turned a blind eye, at the least. And Patterson was innocent. Bullshit. It's not because he was gay. Atlas said he didn't like Patterson because he would grab his pecker in the locker room. Roddy Piper talked about some stuff while not alluding to exactly what it was, and various other people talked about all the stuff that Patterson did. Why would Atlas feel the need to lie? I'm not saying Atlas is a 1,000% truth teller. I'm sure he expands on some stories and tells some fanciful tales. Atlas has no fucking reason to lie. He has no ties to WWE. Even if he's under a Legends contract. Like, that's enough evidence for me to know that I don't give a shit what Patterson did for professional wrestling. Sure, he popularized the Royal Rumble after taking it from Roy Shire and tweaking it and everything. And yeah, that's great. We should be eternally grateful that the Royal Rumble exists. But you know what I'm eternally grateful for? That Patterson died and hopefully he suffered. And Vince McMahon turned a blind eye and hid the fact that Patterson was just as bad as Mel Phillips, just as bad as Terry Garvin. Fuck them all. I'm glad they're all dead. So, the Phil Donahue thing. Who are you going to complain to, Tony Atlas said, by the way? Who are you going to complain to? Vince? Vince needed Patterson a lot more than he needed some of the boys. Phil Donahue show, Vince didn't come across looking all that good. The Phil Donahue Vince McMahon episode, it's on YouTube. I cannot do it justice. You guys need to check that shit out. The Rita Chatterton thing. I wish I had believed her years before. I wish I had. But more information came out, and she talked about, the stuff that Vince did. And nobody deserves to suffer that. Vince, however, said one of the most damning things, at least so far. Vince says that the R never happened. I'm not going to say the word. But he says, once you're accused of that, You're that. But it was consensual. And actually, if it had been an R, the statute of limitations had already, run out. He 1000% did that shit. I'm glad that Bret Hart actually made amends, because he had said in previous shoot interviews a while ago that he didn't believe the Rhea Chatterton thing, and then more came out and he apologized to her, and credit to him. But he 100%, 1000% did that shit. Vince did. The steroid trial, he wasn't going to jail. It was pumped up charges. The federal government, the Justice Department, can be the biggest bullies, Vince says. Boy, he really does sound like Trump, doesn't he? People didn't buy the neck brace because it had been used for comedy and for angles before. And yeah, Vince had neck surgery, but I believe 1000% that he was doing that just, he timed it just to gain sympathy. And Hogan felt it was time to go because he would see stuff like, Hulk, did you take your shot today? They showed a bit of the Royal Rumble. I remember the sign Sid pointed to, Hulk who? Rest in peace, Psycho Sid. Hogan retires at Mania 8. No mention of Mania 9, where he came back and basically set the company back. Bret had talked about how things were getting dire in 92. Nothing about how Hogan basically stunted any growth that they had tried to make in later 92 and early 93. The 93 Rumble was pretty good. Raw had started. They were starting to cook and percolate a little bit. And in Mania 9, everything shut down because Hogan came back and cut them off at the goddamn thighs. Not the knees, the thighs. And then we smash cut to Ted Turner's WCW. Bischoff said, we weren't number 2, we were like number 202. Thunder in Paradise set. Hogan gets talked to by Bischoff. He comes in for a whole lot of money. Jimmy Hart talks about the guaranteed money. And I don't blame Hogan for taking it. Oh, you're going to give me $2 million a year for a few pay-per-views and some television appearances, and I get a cut of the pay-per-view revenue, and I also get a big cut of my merch? Okay. I mean, yeah, Hogan's a piece of shit and a racist and a goddamn lying sack of shit, but you know what? I don't blame him for taking the money. And then they talk about how Vince in 94 dropped the thing, the defamation stuff against Geraldo Rivera, which I forgot about, and also Rita Chatterton. But then in 2023, because of a statute of limitation thing being lifted, Rita was able to get some money out of Vince that she should have gotten years before, and it doesn't nearly come close to taking away even a fraction of the pain and the suffering and the heartache and the terror that she felt. But at least she got some money from that goddamn evil son of a bitch. So yeah, let's go on to episode 3. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Rethlin. I'll see you soon.